we're going to be discussing today mental health and halacha. And I'm humbled that there are a number of mental health professionals here. So, okay, I chose this because I wanted to give something. There were other subjects I wanted to research, but I thought this was the most relevant, as we know, the past couple of years. So this has been the big buzzword about mental health. And I myself just came out of lockdown today. So this is my first time seeing other human beings for the past couple of weeks. You're the last one I saw. Anyway, so it's okay. And we're going to discuss Torah. We're not going to discuss the politics, but right, of course, everyone discusses, the effects of Corona have been awful, but then there's the effects of the lockdown, how they've affected young people and old people and single people, and they're all the different they're all issues which people are aware of. But I was speaking with someone earlier this week, and he told me, so he asked, what subject am I doing? And he works for Telstra. He says, yes. He says, they now have, in a lot of the businesses, I think that nationally they have Mental Health Week, and you're now allowed to take off a day for mental health, to call people and to call other workers. And so there is a lot more awareness about mental health. And so we're going to explore a little bit today, what does halacha say about this? And we're going to see about how our Chazal were aware of many of the issues many years ago, right? So, okay, and once again, I apologize that you can't see. I spent all the time on this PowerPoint, but now that's resilience, right? Resilience is even when things don't go your way, you're able to overcome. Anyway, hashgacha pratis. And by the way, there are a number. Now obviously, this is not a tachlif for professional help, but there are many of these svarim which have gathered. There's the Rebbe's letters. There's years ago. There's a book of letters from the Stipler, right? Speaking of OCD, but there's so much advice. But the Rebbe's letters, many of them are fill your mind with Torah, right? Don't worry about the negative thoughts. But anyway, let's begin with what's the difference between physiological illness and mental illness. So one of the big issues, as we know, when a person has an issue, a physical, right, he's got issues with his heart, with his blood pressure, with diabetes, or a chas v'shalom person, any of these things, we should all be healthy, but a person broke a limb. So one goes to the doctor, and the doctor is able to, he might need a cast, he might need surgery, and it's usually very straightforward. The doctor is able to see what the illness is, and then he can heal it. But one of the issues with mental illness is many times it's self-reporting, right? You have the individual, the patient he is telling you what his issues are, and so the doctor has no way to measure this, right? And so we know physically, so a lot of what we're going to discuss is based on, we have a whole siman in Shulchan Aruch called Shin Chaf Chesed or Chaim, which discusses refuah on Shabbos, medicine on Shabbos. So there are, I guess, in very general terms, there are three categories. There's, if a person has what's called a michush, a person has a michush, he's a bit uncomfortable. So then there are all the restrictions apply on Shabbos. When on Shabbos, one of the lamates malachas, the 39 malachas, is a person is not allowed to crush the spices. It's called to crush. That's called toichen, right? So because of that, the rabbis made all sorts of rabbinical prohibitions of using medications, right? So a person should not come to crush spices. So refuah is because of toichen. So when does that apply? It obviously doesn't apply to someone who has a life-threatening illness. If a person has a life-threatening illness, then he can definitely take medication. He has to take medication. So that applies to someone which has a michush. They have a bit, they have a discomfort. So then they have those restrictions. However, we have the next general category is a choile she'ein bo sakana. You have someone who's sick, but it's not life-threatening. And so we're speaking very general terms. So can do many, so derabbanans, many times he can do a rabbinical prohibition. A goy can do something for him, or sometimes various malachas with a shinoi, depending what it is. And then finally, the most severe category would be a choile sheyesh bo sakana, which a choile sheyesh bo sakana, someone, if there's a, God forbid, a life-threatening illness, then obviously, then there's no Shabbos for him. Discussion whether it's hutra or hutcha. Okay, these are just details, but basically, we know we say v'chai behem, that to save a person's life. So all the restrictions are pushed away in all areas, except of course the gimel, the three things that a person has to. We say, yeh, ya'avor, v'al. Yes, we say. Well, there we say we don't. Yeah, three things we say yahareg v'al ya'avor, right? So, which we'll come back to that. But right now, physiological. This is the introduction. So when it comes to a physiological illness, so it's usually it's easy for the doctors, or fairly easy or straightforward for the doctors to prescribe. However, when it comes to a mental illness, so it's very hard for them to diagnose a person, right? And so that's number one. And so just like it's difficult for doctors, so far when it comes to poiskim, right, within halacha, to know what approach to take, so it's going to be much more difficult. Okay, so we find in many places where Chazal equate a person losing one's mind with pikuach nefesh. There is a Gemara in Shabbos, Chaf Ches on base. The Gemara discusses, and many people say this every night, Friday night, about in the parak of B'mem Madlikin, B'mem Madlikin. So if there is a person is being pursued by goyim, then he's allowed, right? Is the sakana, so he's allowed to extinguish the ner. And one of the things it says, if there's ruach ra, if there's ruach ra, then a person is allowed to put out the candle, to put out a light, which is at face value a malacha deraisa, biblical prohibition. So what is ruach ra? So the Rambam in his Pirush Mishnah says ruach ra, he translates as melancholiness, right? So melancholy. So in other words, depression. If a person is depressed, right, then that Rambam says a person could, or learns the Mishnah, that is ruach ra, and a person could extinguish a candle for the person because they want to be in darkness. Oh, we're going to speak about that. Okay, we're going to get to that, right? But right now, if a person, we find a number of, just a few places. That's one source where it's equated with pikuach nefesh. Now, obviously, we're going to, another source. So there, the Darkei Tshuva quotes a sefer, the Pri Haaretz, which was a Rav in Yerushalayim a few hundred years ago, and the Pri Haaretz, that there was a case. There was somebody who they had lost their mind, and the refuah that was prescribed to them was to take a nevela, take a non-kosher chicken, and to make some type of dish out of it, and they should eat it, right? Which, of course, to eat nevela, that's an issur d'oraisa, and so the Pri Haaretz says to be a shoita is mesukan, right? So shoita here, translated loosely, if a person loses his mind, so that is mesukan, that's dangerous for a person, and therefore that pushed away the prohibition of eating non-kosher food. And he writes that the Beis Din in Salonika, they ruled that was okay. So who knows why did it have to be? I know that's what everyone wonders. Well, why did it have to be a nevela, right? Why did the chicken have to be nevela? But who knows, right? Okay, anyway, but the point is, for whatever reason, the point is he ruled that it pushed off the prohibition of eating non-kosher food because it's sakana for a person to lose their mind. Reb Moshe Feinstein has many tshuvas discussing where he discusses the issue of a person losing their mind. And one of the famous ones in Ibn Ezer, Aleph Siman Samachay. So he says there was a case where a woman had postpartum depression, right? Very severe depression after she had given birth twice. And the question was, could they use various contraceptions, a diaphragm afterwards, right? And there are all the halachic issues with that. And Rav Moshe writes there that shtus is sakana, right? Shtus, they're losing, for the woman to lose her mind, is sakana not only for her, but for her small children, right? In other words, this was considered to be dangerous, and therefore that was it was okay to do things which generally would be prohibited. Okay, so there is a famous sefer that's called Nishmasavram, which there are many, many works, contemporary works about halacha and medicine. And so one of them, it's already, I think, Art Scrolls translated in a lot of it in English, but it's called Nishmasavram, and there is still alive, Professor Avram, Sofer Avram, and Eretz Yisrael, and he, I think, has to do with Shari Tzedek Hospital. And so what he did is he took the whole Shulchan Aruch, or a Chaim, there's 4 volumes, or a Chaim, Yoreh De'ah, Ibn Ezer, each section, and any section to do with medicine, whatever siman, he discusses the medicine. So if a person tefillin, what would be if a person has a cast? Person's on a catheter, right? What would be tefillin? And every single subject, it's fascinating. And so in the introduction to Shin Chav Ches, where it speaks about refuah, medicine and Shabbos, he says, and by the way, we're going to speak a lot about Shabbos today, but it's not about Shabbos, but sometimes just when you speak about Shabbos, it brings out kind of, if you want to put things in a category. So things have been categorized when it comes to Shabbos. So he writes that regarding Chilul Shabbos, there's no difference between a physiological illness and a mental illness. He says everything in Shin Chav Ches, all the various categories, right? There's no difference. Even though one, it's a physical illness, one, it's mental, but we equate them. They're exactly the same. It's not considered any less. And obviously he says at the end, but that's got to be based on, of course, the professional, right? The professional together with the Rav have to make that assessment. What would be allowed and what would not be allowed. So just to bring out the subjectivity of this issue, where that's going to be a big word about objective and subjective. But there is a tshuva of the Marshag. There was and this was in 1928. The Marshag, his name was Shimon Greenfeld from somewhere in Hungary. And he was asked, somebody asked him that they go to Simchas and they have this describes a record player, and they're playing music. And for various reasons, he felt his friend feels it's he had an argument with a friend about whether it's a violation. There's of a prohibition. The Magen Avraham brings asuni barayich kikino. You're not supposed to put psukim to music, and he thought it was a prohibition for various reasons. And his friend says it's okay, and one says it's okay. He thought it was a problem. His friend thought it was okay because if you're invited to a simcha, you're supposed to go, etc. And anyway, so the Marshag answers. He said, it's very difficult for me to answer this question. He says, if it was be a question on Shabbos, kashrus, so usually it's one answer for everybody, either kosher or not kosher. However, he says, this is very subjective. He says, for one person, and he quotes a medrash from Parshas Va'era, and it says, Hu Moshe v'Aaron, Aaron and Moshe. And basically, they were different. Each one had a different way of fulfilling the mitzvah of rebuke. He said Aaron would be makar of the person. Moshe Rabbeinu would speak very, very harshly, right? And he said there were 2 approaches to the same thing. How do you get a person to stop doing an avera, right? So Aaron, it was a way of kiruv, and Moshe Rabbeinu was more in a way of gvura. And you see, the Torah says who Moshe. One place it says Moshe before Aaron. Another place Aaron before Moshe, to show us that they were both equal. And so he says, so too you have different tzaddikim. They have some tzaddikim are very to themselves, some are very mu'uravim abrius. And he says there's 2 different approaches. And so he says, so too when it comes to, he quotes there the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, right? How atzvus is a very bad thing and simcha is very important. So he says, it depends the person. If the person is very mora shchora, if they're very melancholy and they're prone towards depression, so then the music would be a mitzvah for them to listen to the music. On the other hand, if a person is more levain, if a person is they're very sociable, they don't need this. So it's not necessary. Anyway, so just that comes to mind. So it's a lot of these, it really depends on the person. So now about depression. So is it considered to be pikuach nefesh, choila sheyesh bo sakana, or not? So it depends on, this is what the poskim say, what type of depression, right? If it's major depression, so then the poskim bring down, that could be considered choila sheyesh bo sakana. Obviously, if anyone chas v'shalom would have, right, suicidal tendencies, that would be considered, but it doesn't have to be even that bad. That would be choila sheyesh bo sakana. That would be the most, right, severe, the most stringent level. When we say stringent, the level that we allow almost everything. If it would be just a minor depression, so not just, that's also very bad, but the poskim, they equate that to a choila she'ein bo sakana, where there are things we allow, but we don't allow everything. And so there are a number of Gemaras where we see where Chazal take the person's mental state and for example, the Gemara in Yuma, Pei Dalet Amud Beis, speaks about if a child is locked behind a door, so the Gemara says you're allowed to smash the door down, right? So Rashi says, why? Because the child will be scared. So it's clear there for the Gemara that it's not because the child's in physical danger, but we're worried that his mental state will put him, the sakana is his mental state, right? And so the Gemara says you can bash the door down, right? On Shabbos, that's right. So eating on Yom Kippur. So there's a famous Gemara also in Yuma. So it speaks about, and this is also brought in Shulchan Aruch and Tafresh Yud Ches. So you have the doctors feel that it's the person, the choila does not need to eat. And the choila says, the sick person feels he does need to eat, right? So who knows more? The doctor has been through, 7 years of medical school. So wouldn't he know more? Who do we listen to? The doctor or the choila? Who do we listen to? The doctor says, we eat lechoila, but who knows more? The choila or the? I remember once there was a rabbinical meeting of some sort about, and there were like 30 rabbis there, and the question was who should give the eulogy. And it was a discussion, the family or the rabbi. So one rabbi said, why should he give the eulogy? I've done this hundreds of times. He's never done this before. Another person says, yeah, but it's his parent. Anyway, but I don't know if that's really connected. But anyway, who knows more, right? The doctor's been through medical school and he's seen hundreds of patients, right? And there's a choila. What is a choila now? Right? So we listen, so the halacha is, we listen to the choila, but so the Gemara says, why? Quotes a pasuk, Leiv yoidea maras nafshoy, right? That a person knows himself, right? So in this discussion, they point out, so this is not considered to be, so here we believe this is not mental, right? This is not because mentally, if he doesn't eat, he's going to go crazy, right? Here, there's an objective concern. Maybe the doctor's misassessing things. If the choila says he needs to eat, then maybe Taki really needs to eat, right? So we're not talking about this. This is not a proof about, that we take into consideration one's mental state, because when we say leiv yodeh maras nafsho, he could be really Taki needs to eat. So we have here. So here the main sugya about, I guess, a person's mental state within halacha is what's called yisuve daita. And so this is the Gemara in Kuf Chaf Ches, and the Gemara in Shabbos. There's a Mishnah, and it says that if there is a woman, right, that is going to deliver on Shabbos, it says we can deliver a woman on Shabbos even if it involves Chil Shabbos. And it says koirim chachama mimakom lamakom. We call a midwife from place to place. And then the Mishnah adds the words umechalalen ales Shabbos, and we're mechal Shabbos for. Now we just mentioned two forms of Chil Shabbos, right? Why does then the Mishnah say then we're mechal Shabbos? to call a midwife from another town that is Chil Shabbos. So the Gemara says, what's it talking about? A case where she is going to deliver and she says, oh my goodness, my thing's about to die. More resilience here. Okay, both are not going to work. Oh no. What? Will that work? Okay. Anyway, I don't know how to email from one thing to the other. Can you email this to here? So, thank you so much. I guess, yeah, thanks. Please. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to put Yusuv Daita. So now this is going to be my Yusuv Daita about mind. So here, so the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says, what are we talking about? The Mishnah, when it says we're Machal Shabbos for, is a case where she wants a candle, right? She insists that she wants the candle lit. So the Gemara says, well, why wouldn't we light a candle if she wants a candle lit on Shabbos, right? To help her deliver. The Gemara says we're dealing with the case where she's blind. So she says she wants a candle, but she doesn't really need the candle. And so you would have thought that we don't light a candle for her because it's not necessary. The Gemara says, no, because Yisuve Daita, if it's going to give her Yishuv Das, so then we allow the candle. So the Maggid Avram, this is Yishuv Das means for settle her mind, right? To settle her mind, if it's going to make her more calm, then we allow the candle. So the Maggid Avram asks, he says, well, that's right. That's the Chiddush. Even though she gains no benefit from it. Ah, very good. So the Maggid Avram says, why don't we just tell her? Why don't we just tell her, okay, we lit the candle. So now the midwives and everything, everyone can see perfectly, right? We lit the candle. So the Maggid Avram says two answers. Number one, he says, maybe she's like legally blind. She's blind, but she could see in a little bit, right? He doesn't say the words legally blind, but maybe she can see a little bit. She'll be able to tell. And it's the second answer. Oh, thank you. Okay. And the second answer he gives is that maybe she will say, maybe she'll test them. She'll stick out a finger. How many fingers do I have up? Okay. Anyway, but so then the Maggid Avram asks a question. He says, but you know what? If she's worried that they don't have enough light, why don't they really need light, right? Why does the Gemara have to give the answer for Yisuve Daita to calm her down? We'll light the candle. If she feels that a candle is necessary, then maybe they do need light. So the Maggid Avram answers that objectively, it's not necessary, right? If the Gemara gives that answer, obviously there's enough light, right? They can do their work 100%. Nonetheless, if she insists on having a candle lit, right? So if that's going to make her more calm, then we allow that. Okay, so now this is a concept called Yisuve Daita, right? For the Choila, we'll call her the Yoletus, right? That's the context of the Gemara in the Shulchan Aruch. If this woman, and by the way, the Shulchan Aruch says that a Yoletus, we treat her as a Choila Sheish by Sakana, right? That potentially it's a life-threatening situation. If she wants a candle lit, even if the doctors and the midwives feel that it's not necessary, if it's going to make her calm, then we do it for her, right? So this Gemara shows that a person's mental state, that trumps everything, right? Yes. Well, I mean, even one life where we don't need two lives to be. I don't think that's brought because the baby is well. In other words, just the mother itself is enough. We don't. So here comes the question. So the question which the Mefarshim ask is, we find a number of other places in the Gemara and in the Shulchan Aruch where we have a different expression called Shema Titaref Daitoi. So one of the cases, and Sivan Shin Vav, it discusses, you have a person if a person died on Shabbos, it says, a person died, God forbid, and it says you're not allowed, just get to the case. A person is about to die. And they say on Shabbos, I want my family here with me. So the Shulchan Aruch says, is based on Mordechai, you are allowed to get a non-Jew to travel even outside of the Tchum Shabbos, right? Even outside of the Shabbos boundaries. And that non-Jew can go and inform the family so they can come after Shabbos. And all of that is allowed. So because Shema Ti Toref Daito, maybe this person will have Tiruf Adas. Otherwise, if we don't do what he wants. And so too, we find other places, the Gemara says that if there's a Shriv Merah is a person, on his deathbed, and he doesn't want his wife, God forbid, to become in a state of, igun because of Yibum, in order to avoid Yibum and Chalitza. So we will write a get, right? We will allow him to write the get on Shabbos, or to give the get on Shabbos, and also to to give over his Yerusha. Certain situations we allow Shema Titoref Daitoi. But over here, these are all Dirabbanans. In other words, let's stick with this case. What are we allowing? We'll allow, in order that he shouldn't have Tiruf Adas, he shouldn't go crazy, right? We allow him to send a non-Jew to inform the relatives. So why is that? And so the question is, how come to inform his relatives that he's very sick because he wants them to be there, visit him before he passes away? And so what are we allowing? We only allow a Mira L'Nachri, right? A Mira L'Nachri is a Shavus. And so here is the question that is asked. Once we're going to in the first Gemara we quoted, in Shabbos Kuf Chav Ches, it's in Shulchan Aruch Shin Lamed, we allow for Yoletus who's about to give birth, we allow to light a candle, which is an Issa D'Oraisa, lighting a fire, right? Even though it's not necessary at all, right? Because that's going to calm her down. That is for Yisuve Daita. Yet, in Siman Shin Vav, right? If a person is going to have Tiruf Hadas, he's going to lose his mind, we allow him to send a non-Jew, even outside of the Tchum Shabbos, right? Even outside of the Shabbos border, in order that the family can travel after Shabbos, right? So how come one case for the Yoletus we allow in Issa D'Oraisa? Okay, so how come we allow, translate, how come we allow a biblical prohibition for the woman who is in a situation of delivering a baby, and for this case of a person who's on his deathbed, and so he shouldn't have Tiruf Adas, lose his mind, we only allow a D'Rabbanan, right? A rabbinical prohibition. Okay, so the answer that is given, this is given by the Tzitz Eliezer, gives us, and others, is that obviously Chazal, right? They felt, Chazal, our sages, that the case of a Yoletus, if she does not get what she needs, right? If she is not in a good state of mind, right? It could be pikuach nefesh. It could be, her life could be in danger. But in the case of the person who's on his deathbed and he'd like to have his relatives there, right? That's not going to make him better, right? That's just something he would like, right? If he does not get his way, so he's not going to he won't be as calm, he won't be as happy, but that's not actually going to make it or break it and destroy his health, right? That's the answer that Tzitz Eliezer explains. However, the Aruch HaShulchan says that if the doctors feel that if he does not get what he needs, right? His request, not what he needs, because objectively, all these cases, they don't really need it, right? If he doesn't get it, it could affect his health and he could die, right? Then it doesn't matter what it is, even if it would be a biblical prohibition, we could do it. Okay, we could do that for him. So we have so the question is this, what's called Yisuve Daita, how far do we extend this, right? Is it anything she needs, anything she wants? And is it not only a Yoletus, a woman in giving birth, but is it any sick person? So there's a something called Asya, which is a medical journal. And in one of the articles there, they quote Dr. Rabbi Mordechai Halperin, which is also connected with Shaare Tzedek Hospital. And he wants to learn that the case of a Yodletus, a woman giving birth, is very unique, because he explains that that there's three stages in childbirth. There's leading up to the contractions, and then there's actual birth itself. And the third stage is when the placenta comes out. And he says the first and second section should speak to the men more. It's more relevant. You'll understand more. Anyway, he said that the second, that her state, when she is, when she's delivering the baby, right, her state of mind, that's all dependent upon the first stage, right? If she is in a good state of mind, then it will make it much easier, right? We'll speak about the whole doula soon, right? But if she is not in a not good state of mind, then it will affect how she delivers, and then there's a much higher chance for complications, God forbid. And so therefore we can understand why the Gemara says, yes, whatever she needs for Yisuba Daita, right? Whatever she needs she should be in a calm state, we allow, because there is medically, we can see the connection between that middle stage, the delivery, to her mental state. And right, and she feels, the case the Gemara says she wants a candle, right? So it's something that she feels is going to help, although objectively it's not going to help, because they don't need the light. But if she feels, they'll do a better job. Okay, and so therefore, based on that, the pois can bring, if it's anything, this Mordechai Halperin, he brings, and the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chesed brings this, if a woman, let's say she's going to deliver, and there could be a hospital, we have here, we used to have Masada. We used to have Masada, right? You could walk. I know for our first, it wasn't even Shabbos. We walked there. For our first number of children, we just walked there. It was easier because we lived a block away, right? So, but what if a woman feels that if she goes to somewhere in the city, they can do a better job, right? But they'll have to be Michal Shabbos, right? It's allowed, right? Because if it's Yisuba Daita, because that's where her obstetrician is, or she feels it's a better hospital. So that's fine. So too, when it comes to a doula, right, which they're much more popular today, right, a doula, and all the details, does she have to go with the woman? Does she have to go, and can she go in a separate car, right? These are all details, right, which obviously have to be worked out with the person and their Rav. That we're not paskening any practical halacha here, but the poskim say a doula is allowed because that's going to help the woman's mental state, right? She'll be, and they bring lots of proofs that women which have doulas, they have there's a much less chance. A doula is someone like a birthing coach. A birthing coach, there are a lot less chance of having C-sections, etc. Right? So too for the husband to come with her, and there's all the details: her husband, and her mother-in-law, and probably not the mother-in-law, the mother. Anyway, and even Rabbi, there's a big dine in Eretz Yisrael, Shlomo Daichowski discusses, but very holding hands, right? If a woman is in hysteria, she's in hysteria, and she insists that her husband hold her hand during birth, right? Which we know is al pi halacha, it's a major problem. But he discusses that. Well, if it's pikuach nefesh, right? If this would, anyway, and it's interesting in that discussion we mentioned before, Yehoreg, Ya'avor v'al Yehoreg. So there was in the Torah journals, there was a discussion about that. And so someone wrote that this shouldn't even be discussed publicly, because if it will be discussed publicly, so that people will think it's okay. And women which didn't think about it before, about having their husband hold hands during birth, so they'll think, okay, well, there's a heter. And so he says, it says, Yehoreg. So Rabbi Daichowski says, it says Yehoreg val Yavor. It says by the three things you have to give up your life and not transgress. It doesn't say Yaharoig val Yavor. It says Yehoreg. It says take your life and don't transgress. It doesn't say don't kill someone else, not to transgress, if anyone follows that. In other words, let me just explain. He says the play on words. Yehoreg val Yavor means there are the three cardinal sins which a person is not allowed to transgress. They have to give up their life for, right? It says you have to give up your life not to transgress them, but you can't kill someone else not to have them transgressed. So he writes to another rabbi who was machmir, even if the woman was in hysteria, that under no circumstances could the husband ever hold her hand during childbirth. He says, by you not discussing this, it's yaharoig va'al ya'avor. You're causing someone else to die. Anyway, okay, moving on. But the point is, so this is all, to what extent could we, Yisuva Daita, what would that allow, right? We find other cases. There's a famous Minchas Yitzchak. There was a discussion many years ago about there was a certain illness and people who went into the hospital, if they would have their tefillin brought in, so whatever was brought into the hospital had to be burnt afterwards because they didn't want to spread the disease. Yeah. And so the question the poskim discussed, well, can a person bring in their tefillin? Because if they're going to have their tefillin in the hospital, so once they leave the hospital, it will all have to be burnt, including the tefillin. Of course, chas v'shalom, we're not allowed. There's a prohibition not to burn, not to destroy Hashem's name, not to burn tefillin. And so the Minchas Yitzchak writes that someone, initially he was machmer, and then he says that someone raised the svara that, you know what, that actually not having tefillin could affect their mental state, and that could make them physically worse. And he writes that someone said this in the name of a Goyna Tzaddik, Milubavitch. He says, makes sense, right? And he recognized that and so basically those that would say we would allow this is a biblical prohibition for the tefillin to be destroyed because otherwise it would affect the person's mental state. Whoever the person in the hospital, their tefillin, whatever tefillin they used, would have to be destroyed when they left the hospital, right? And so some of the poskim the Minchas Yitzchak brings allowed that because they understood that there's a direct correlation between their mental state to their health, right? Their physical health. Another place where we see this, so there is a Torah journal called Tchumen, which comes out yearly from a summit, right? And so they discuss in volume 23. So there was a Rabbi Yisrael Rosen, Alav Shalom. He actually gave a shir here in the Koil a number of years ago. But he discusses a case of Rahman al-Islam. There was a time there were many terrorist attacks in these yeshuvim. And the question was, obviously, so the ambulance and everyone comes. Could a team of social workers arrive on Shabbos, right? Is that, in other words, are social workers coming to the site? Is that allowed, right? Is that considered to be pikuach nefesh for them? Because they're not helping the person physically, right? They're helping them mentally. And so Rabbi Rav Rosen, he wrote a very extensive article, right? Proving why this is also pikuach nefesh, right? Their mental state, the morale, this is pikuach nefesh. Anyway, afterwards he wrote it to the Mishnah Halacha, right? Because whether they could they come back afterwards? Could they drive back to the social workers back home? But the Mishnah Halacha, he didn't feel like it was necessary. He says, it's a sveka. Maybe do they really need the social? People don't always need the social workers, right? And who said they need them right then, right? Anyway, but they discussed that. That's at one place. Social workers coming, or how about heads of the community, for one of the community leaders, right, to drive to the next yeshuv to give moral support. Shlomo Goren, where the former chief rabbi speaks about of the army, also speaks. If there was to collect the bodies on Shabbos of dead soldiers, could the bodies be? That's not pikuach nefesh, right? Because Rahman al-Islam, they were killed, right? But to collect the bodies, he says this is for the morale of the entire army, right? This is going to affect people's mental state if they know that the bodies would just remain there until after Shabbos. So in the Tchumen 24, someone has an article there about if there was an attack, to bring the family together, right, on Shabbos, right, to help give them chizuk, right, to bring other family members together, right. So these are all extensions of the principle of Yisuve Daita to give a person, to calm their mind. So another place we find this discussed at length is about music to combat depression. So we mentioned already the tshuva about the marshag. So that was about all year round, which he said it depends on the individual. So there was a tshuva of Rav Yaakov Breish, which was a Rav in Switzerland, and in Chelkas Yaakov Siman or Chaim Siman Samach Daled. So he discusses a person is very nervous and is, I guess, prone towards depression. Could he leave the radio on from before Shabbos and have the music playing on Shabbos, right? And he was matir. He said it was allowed. And okay, it's long, and people wrote back and they said it was prohibited. And he proved why he felt it was allowed. But basically because, you're initiating the malach. But the main point is that he said this person is maybe a choyle sheyesh boi sakana, but at the very least, this was a choyle she'ein boi sakana, right? And for a choyle she'ein boi sakana, in other words, it's at least a non-life-threatening illness. So an isser, a rabbinical prohibition for sure would be allowed. And that's right here. The radio was being left from before Shabbos, and it was just going in. So a person wasn't actually pressing any buttons. There is, this was on the internet, there's an organization, Beit Hillel, right? They call them centrist Orthodox. I think they're more to the left. They call themselves centrist. Anyway, but so they have a whole kuntris about mental health, and they do one even better than that. Said, what if a person's therapist has told them that they need to, right? They're noted towards depression, and the only thing that helps is when they play an instrument. Have it to actually play the instrument on Shabbos, right? Would we allow them to play the instrument? And so they discussed that, and obviously all this would depend on how bad the situation is. Because one of the things they point out is that the way and the professionals can is that once a person, God forbid, once they fall down, right? That once they fall down, so it's very hard to get a person up, right? And so therefore, preventing a person from falling into that state, that's also pikuach nefesh, right? Pikuach nefesh is to prevent it from happening, right? And so, okay, yes. So obviously, yeah. So there's a lot about that in Sefer Nita Gavriel speaks a lot about that, about music during. So that's obviously that's discussed, right? And Rabbi Zinner discusses about if a person is noita toward in Avelis. We know during Avelis, a person is mourning. A person's not supposed to listen to music for the whole 12 months. And then there's the 3 weeks, right, leading up to Tisha B'Av. And there's the period between Pesach and Shavuos, Sfiras Omer, with times of national mourning. So, and what the poets can point out is you're not supposed to have the simcha. That's the problem. But for many people, the music is not simcha. They need that, right? Person needs that, or they're going to go mad, right? Just like the poets can bring, if a person is driving, the analogy which is brought, if a person is driving, and today you see always signs, take a power nap, right? So if a person is driving, then they would be allowed during Sfiras Omer to have music playing so they shouldn't fall asleep, because otherwise, God forbid, they should crash. So too, a person would be allowed, right, if they need music to just keep them, right, from becoming depressed, that would be allowed, because that's not simcha, right? So that's also discussed. But that's obviously something that's not talking about Issur Deraisa or an Issur Derabanan, right? That's right. And many places can discuss that. Anyway, okay, so another place where we find that mental health is discussed is about abortion, right? So in the Sefer Nishmasavram, right, in Choshe Mishpat Siman Taf Chaf Hey, which speaks about killing someone, right? So the quotes the Levushi Mordechai, which was a posek in Hungary, says Tira Fadas is Pikuach Nefesh, a case where if, right, a woman is pregnant and she could go crazy, right, from it. So the Levushi Mordechai was matir to do, he allowed doing an abortion, even though abortion generally is not allowed. And however, he brings Nishmasavram he said he spoke to many top psychiatrists that it's not recommended always. Obviously, there are a lot of details here, because sometimes it can make it worse, right? Because sometimes that a person is in a very compromised state and they abort the baby, and then it can lead them into even worse depression, right? But this is a place where where a lot of tshuvas discuss this. That Tzitz Eliezer has a famous tshuva about a baby, Rachman al-Slan, a woman is pregnant with Tay-Sachs, right? And he gives a heter for an abortion, and because he says the knowledge that she's, he says that could actually make her lose her mind, knowing what the situation once she delivers, how the baby's not going to live that long. Also, Tshuvas van Haggis, Rav Sternbuch speaks about a single girl. She got pregnant, and her partner would marry her, and she was humiliated and she was afraid anyway. And he speaks also, and she had attempted suicide already, and anyway, he discusses also abortion for her mental state. Okay, another case where this is on a lighter note. So what about what this is discussed? What about to send a kvittel to a tzaddik on Shabbos, right? If a person, there's a situation of pikuach nefesh. So pikuach nefesh pushes off Shabbos. So what if a person, in our circles, a person, he wants to write, he says, I have to write a letter in Igros Kodesh. Now, could a person, or the person wants to write off, here I have a picture here, which is not on the board of the Barditchever's oil, but a person wants to send a letter to the oil or write into Igros or something like that. Would they be allowed to do it on Shabbos, right? And so this is discussed. Could a person ask a goy, right? Could a person ask a goy to write the kvittel? A lot of people say, ask a goy to write a kvittel, right? So the Eshel of Rambuchach, he right away, he negates this. However, there's a sefer called Mincha Shabbos, and the Mincha Shabbos, he brings a discussion that he had, and he says, based on the Tzemach Tzedek, right? He says, there's a big discussion about what about it's not what's it called? Not regular medical refuah, but refuah, which is more called refuah skulis. If it's what's the word for it? Alternative medicine, right? Alternative medicine. If you do this and you do that, are you, as a person, allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, desecrate Shabbos for alternative medicine? And okay, so he quotes a tshuva that Tzemach Tzedek, and he says, well, if we allow it for different forms of alternative medicine, right? There's kameya. They used to have these amulets, and we allowed a person to be Mechal Shabbos for a kameya if it worked 3 times. Well, he says, well, hey, this has worked more than 3 times, right? The tefillas of a tzaddik, right, have worked much more than 3 times. So this is like a kameya mumcha, right? And he discusses this, and a lot of this has to do with a person's with Yisuva Daita, because if the choile feels, right, their mental state that they have to have their name and their mother's name mentioned by the tzaddik, right? So they're poiskim which would allow this. Okay, and so we will conclude that we have seen over the past couple of years, right, many novel rulings. There have been many svarim which have all the halachas of Corona, and there's a website, what is it called, Kol Corona. And if for a couple of years, they were collecting all the new rulings, and unfortunately, they were practical, they were lemaisa, right? But they were fascinating, that all these chidushim, which never happened. It all started, everyone remembers, right before Pesach, about the Zoom Seder, right? Everyone remembers that, right? So it was all over that there were 15 rabbis, some organization which no one had heard of, 15, the Chachmei, the Moroccan rabbis, 15, huh? No, yeah, no, they weren't from the temple, right? But the 15 Moroccan rabbis, and they said based on in Morocco they would turn lights on and off, electric lights on Shabbos, and so they felt that it should be allowed because it was right away the first lockdown, and in order that the grandchildren could have a seder together with the baba, I guess that wasn't baba and zeta, with the saba and savta, right? So they allowed the Zoom seder, and so right away all the Rabbi Shlomo Amar and all the chief rabbis, Mordechai Eliyahu's sons, all the chief rabbis of Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Lau and Avadi Yosef's son, they were attacked, right? Because what they wrote was based on a misunderstanding of electricity, which we're way past that. But anyway, But one thing that did come to the forefront that the motivate, and afterwards, over half the people that had signed, they said that's not what they said, and it was. But what came to the forefront is it was pikuach nefesh, as it was. They were saying no. What we meant, a lot of the rabbis were legitimate rabbis. They said no, we're not matir azum seder. The question that came to us, if it's pikuach nefesh, right? If you have the grandfather is going to be, for his first time in lockdown, and we're worried that who knows what it's going to do to his health if he's going to be alone, right? Then that's when we allowed that for pikuach nefesh. And so Rav Hershel Schechter, he also wrote, he had his Piskei Corona, and what he wrote, we're not going to allow a Zoom Seder, but he said if a person is a fragile mental state, then of course you can write to them, then they should be called. Then you should phone on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, to help them, right? So just to conclude, right? So that mental illness should be taken very seriously, as we see from the sources, many of the sources, that it's looked at many times as pikuach nefesh, and so this has been, and we have cases from the times of Chazal and the contemporary poskim. It's still developing as we speak, and so everyone should have a refuah shlema, and all of us in our families, we should be healthy, begashmias, beruchnias, physically and mentally, and everyone should have a healthy summer. Okay.